Alright, so I want to talk a little bit more about Jean-Paul Sartre and basically about what the difference between the being in itself is and the being for itself is. The being in itself is an unconscious, unchanging, concrete, constant being, such as a inanimate object in this world is a being in itself. A being for itself, however, is a conscious being. The being for itself is the self. It's consciousness. It's a changing thing, and it's something that can engage in perception and even apperception. Apperception being perceiving that you are perceiving. The being for itself, or the human self itself, is a incomplete and undetermined nature that it has. And Sartre's existentialism is about who we are as people. It kind of talks about who we are and gives hints at that. And Sartre says about freedom that we have to create ourselves. We have to create ourselves, and that's part of what freedom is. I'll talk about that in a different video. But because of the incomplete nature of man, we have to create ourselves out of nothingness. We create ourselves via self-negation and thus nothingness, and that's where anguish comes from, and that's how bad faith occurs. I'll talk more about that too. So, man makes himself by acting in this world, and there's ways in which he can do that wrongly, and there's ways in which he can do that correctly, in which case he can be in good faith rather than in bad faith, because it's very possible and usually occurs in every person at some point and at most points in their life where they make themselves in the wrong way, in which case they'll be in a bad faith and thus, out of nothingness, and will not actualize himself fully in the way of good faith. The for itself has meaning in many different ways that he himself creates, and that's kind of the difference between the in itself and the for itself. And the for itself, with its incomplete nature, can often try to actualize or absorb the in itself. In that way, he can be in a state of bad faith. That's kind of how that can happen. Cigarette lit went out. So that's kind of the difference that I wanted to highlight here. It's pretty important to understand when you're reading Sartre, and I have this little compilation of his works in this book here. It's a pretty old book. It's kind of why I like it. I like old books. So that's kind of the difference between those two. And he talks about how man, or the for itself, can be free, how he can have meaning, and how at the same time there's no concrete foundational meaning that man has, that he has to create such a meaning, and he has to go about it his own way. And that's basically that difference. And then we'll talk about more in different videos, things like bad faith and nothingness and freedom and the gaze of the other, which is also very, very important.